3 words. That's all it took to send me over the edge. She was walking out the door, keys in hand, looking effortlessly smug in her 2 high heels and that perfume she only ever wore on girls' nights. She turned back, tilted her head, and smirked like I was an intern she was about to fire. Don't wait up. And then, the kicker. You know, if I ever replaced you, I'd upgrade. She laughed. Not a laugh of kindness. Not even a sarcastic laugh. It was surgical, the kind that slices clean and deep, before you even realize you've been cut. She closed the door, humming. I stood there for 5 minutes. I didn't breathe. Didn't move. Just stared at the door like it owed me an explanation. What do you do when someone tells you, to your face, that you're replaceable? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't chase her down like a broken sitcom character. No. I walked to the mirror, stared at the tired man looking back, the one who paid the mortgage, folded the towels right, bought her parents' anniversary gifts she always forgot, and I whispered out loud. Then maybe it's time. I replace you. Here's the twist. She didn't cheat. Not yet. Not that I knew of. There were no caught-in-the-act moments. No lipstick. No texts. Not even a hotel receipt. What there was mockery. Repeated. Cruel. Casual. She joked about trading me in the way people joke about upgrading phones, as if love had a warranty and she was 2 weeks from cashing it in. And I just stood there. For months. Letting it happen. She'd come home, toss her heels into the corner, scroll through her phone, and chuckle, "You wouldn't survive a day without me." She said things like, "My next husband will be taller. You're the trial version. I might subscribe to premium later." Always laughing. Always brushing it off like I was the weak one for being hurt. So, I decided to give her what she joked about. No yelling. No slamming doors. I became invisible. I deleted myself from the shared calendar. I stopped reminding her about her dentist appointments. I let her forget her dry cleaning. I removed myself from the photos on the fridge one by one. She never noticed. Then I took it further. I pulled half the money from our joint account. Quietly. Spread it out. New account. My name only. I met with a lawyer during her yoga classes. Filed paperwork. Got a P.O. box. I was halfway moved out before she ever realized I'd started. She was busy posting selfies with captions like, "Deserve more. Demand better." So I gave her what she demanded. I gave her the freedom she joked about. But here's the real punchline. When I handed her the papers, she looked up and said, "Wait, are you serious?" That's when I finally laughed. Because for the first time in years, I was. She didn't even read the first page. When I slid the envelope across the table at brunch, yes, brunch, because I figured if she could belittle our marriage in public, I could end it there too, she didn't even blink. Just took a sip of her mimosa, rolled her eyes, and said, "What is this? Another one of your spreadsheets?" "No, not this time. This," I said calmly, "is your upgrade." I'll give her credit. She read the word petition on the first line and finally looked up, confused. Not angry. Just confused, like I'd messed up the punchline to a joke we'd supposedly both been in on. "You're not serious," she whispered, as if louder words might shatter her carefully curated brunch aesthetic. That was the moment I realized just how deeply she'd underestimated me. You see, when you spend years being the nice guy, the safe bet, the boring husband who organizes cables by color, people stop seeing you as a threat. Danica never thought I had the guts to act, only to absorb. But I had been absorbing more than she realized. Not just her insults and jokes, but patterns, habits, her schedule, her weak spots. Like the way she always left her laptop open when she got in the shower. Or the fact that she used the same 2 passwords for everything. Or that her beloved Alex, yes, I figured it out, wasn't some fleeting fantasy. He was real. And he was married. With a job that couldn't afford a scandal. And I had the screenshots to prove it. But I didn't confront her with any of it. No. I let her read the papers in silence. No dramatic monologue. No gotcha moment. I just watched her facial expressions change in real time, like someone slowly realizing they'd been living in a house with a time bomb under the floorboards. "You're making a mistake," she finally said. "You're not thinking clearly." No, Danica. For the first time in years, I was thinking with brutal clarity. "You joked about replacing me," I said. "So I replaced you." Before the joke ended, she laughed. Again. A nervous kind of laugh this time, but still clinging to that old habit of mockery. "With who?" she asked. "Some gym bunny? Or one of your boring tech clients?" I leaned back in my seat. It doesn't matter who, I replied. It matters how. I replaced you in every way that counts. Financially, emotionally, legally, quietly. She sat still, absorbing it. She was never good at silence. I thought you loved me, she said, after a long pause. And for a moment, I felt it. That faint tug, that ridiculous echo of who we used to be. Then I remembered the mug, the tree, the texts, the humiliation disguised as humor. I did, I said. But love isn't supposed to feel like performance art. I stood up and left her there, right between a bowl of overpriced eggs and her fourth mimosa. She didn't follow me. But I knew she would later, not physically, digitally, emotionally. She'd come crawling through mutual friends. She'd stalk my social media. She'd find out, piece by piece, that her little trial version husband had turned out to be the full release, just not for her. That night, I went home to my new apartment. Small, neat, temporary. On the table was a bottle of wine, one I bought myself. No occasion, no hidden meaning, no joke attached, just peace and silence. And for the first time in years, it felt like both were on my side. I didn't hear from her for 5 days. Not a text, not an email, not even one of those indirect Instagram stories that you know are about you, but they swear aren't. It was like she'd vanished, like someone had pulled her from the simulation. And for a while, I enjoyed the silence. Too much, probably. I went back to doing all the little things I hadn't done in years. I made breakfast for one and didn't get mocked for using too much butter. I watched a horror movie at full volume without being told it was too intense. I left the bathroom door open. I didn't care. But the peace didn't last. Because on the 6th day, she showed up. Not a call. Not a text. Not a knock. She used the spare key. I'd forgotten about it. The one I gave her years ago when we had trust. She walked into my new apartment like she still lived there, like she belonged, like none of it was real. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard the door click open. I didn't even flinch. She looked different. Not in the way you hope someone does after a breakup. Not desperate, not broken. Just confused. Like she'd walked into a movie halfway through and couldn't figure out what genre she was in. "This is it?" she asked, looking around like she'd stepped into a motel room. "This is where you live now?" I didn't answer right away. I let her sit with the silence she was so good at avoiding. She walked to the bookshelf, looked at the single-framed photo, not of us, but of a trail I hiked alone 2 months before the divorce. One of the few times I'd felt like a real human again. Then she turned to me. "You didn't even fight for me." And there it was. That line. The most predictable lie wrapped in a victim's tone. She had mocked me, flirted her way around town, hinted at my replaceability, and now she wanted me to feel bad for not chasing the woman who threw me off a cliff and dared me to enjoy the fall. "I wasn't in a fight," I said quietly. "I was in a hostage situation." She flinched at that. Not visibly, but I saw her mouth tense. That's not fair. Neither was building a life with someone who kept sharpening knives behind my back and calling it flirting. Silence. Long, heavy. Then she said something that changed everything. "You still don't know the full story." I raised an eyebrow. My hands were steady, but my chest tightened just a little. She pulled her phone out, slowly, like it was a sacred artifact, opened her photos, and showed me a picture of a man. Not Alex. Someone older. Gray hair. Thin glasses. A man I didn't recognize. "Who's that?" I asked. She took a long breath. "That's the man I thought I wanted to leave you for." Thought. Past tense. "I met him at a work retreat," she said. "He said all the things you didn't. Said I looked alive. Told me I had potential." I stared at her. My mouth was dry. "He ghosted me 2 weeks ago," she said. "Disappeared. No explanation. I think he was married. Or lying. Or both." I let the silence return. She looked at me like I was supposed to cry. Or offer sympathy. Or something. But all I felt was a bizarre, surreal calm. Like I was watching a storm finally spin itself out. "You were a placeholder for him," I said. "And now that he's gone, you're crawling back to the man you mocked." "I didn't crawl. You used the spare key. That's crawling in slow motion." That one landed. She sat down. In my chair. Folded her arms. "I miss us." There it was. Not regret. Not an apology. A plea to rewind time. A luxury she had destroyed in the name of freedom. I walked over. Calm. Kind. Even. I knelt beside her and whispered, "Then you're mourning a version of me that doesn't exist anymore." I stood up. Took the spare key from her hand. She didn't fight it. She left quietly. but not before turning back at the door and saying, I was joking, about replacing you. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I closed the door behind her. The joke was dead, but somehow she still hadn't stopped laughing. The key was gone. The door was locked, but I still didn't feel like she was truly out of my life. I should have known better. Danica was the type of person who never left a room until she'd made sure you were still staring at the empty space where she used to be. She didn't exit, she haunted. 3 days passed, and on the third morning, I found a package waiting outside my door. No return address. Just my name, written in her handwriting. Sharp. Precise. Mocking. I brought it inside with hesitation. There was no note inside. Just a flash drive, and a folded legal-sized envelope labeled, FYI. For a second, I considered tossing it. But curiosity is a terrible addiction. I opened the envelope first. Inside were copies of documents not divorce-related. These were older, private, unfamiliar. A birth certificate. But not mine. Not hers. It was for a child. A boy. Born 6 years ago. Mother, Danica L. Whitaker. Father, unknown. My hands started shaking. I went to the flash drive next, plugged it into my laptop. Just one folder. Inside were dozens of videos, all security cam clips. Footage from a house I didn't recognize. But she was in every single one. Cooking. Walking barefoot. Sometimes laughing on the couch with a toddler. A boy. His face pixelated by poor camera quality, but I saw it. Same ears. Same posture. Same fidgeting hands I've had since childhood. I couldn't breathe. I watched clip after clip. They weren't recent. The timestamps were from 5 years ago. She'd lived a second life, while I was still planning anniversary dinners and surprise weekends. I didn't know what to think. Rage? Betrayal? But what echoed loudest was something even worse. Pity. Not for her. For him. That child. A ghost hidden from me. Until now. I called her. For the first time since she walked out of my new apartment. No answer. I texted. Still nothing. That night, I found myself pacing like an idiot in front of her old office building, debating whether I'd lost my mind. But around 8:20 p.m., my phone buzzed. Danica. I told you there were things you didn't know. He was the reason I joked. I was terrified. The father's not who you think. And it's not you. But maybe he should have been. What? My mind couldn't keep up. One sentence shattered everything, and the next twisted it back into something more confusing. If I wasn't the father, why the resemblance? Why the videos? Why the sudden reveal? And then it clicked. She wanted me to believe something. Or more precisely, she wanted me to question everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by printouts, videos, screenshots. I wasn't trying to piece together a timeline. I was trying to remember what parts of our life had been real, if any. And then I did something I hadn't done since the beginning of the divorce. I opened the hidden email account I'd created months ago, the one I'd used to send private messages to a contact I hoped I'd never need. The investigator. I typed out one line. I need you to find out everything she's kept buried. Because if Danica thought she was ending the story with a twist, she didn't realize. I had one too. And this time, I would be the one holding the pen. She always said I was paranoid. That I overanalyzed everything. That my imagination was both my gift and my curse. I used to believe that, until the day the truth arrived in a brown envelope. It came 2 days after I sent the email to Erica, the private investigator. She didn't call. She didn't text. Just a note slipped under my door with a package that looked like it could have come from a government agency. No emotion. No opinion. Just evidence. There was a folder inside. Thick. Too thick. Dozens of pages. Photos. Statements. Bank records. Hotel check-ins. Flight receipts. Names I didn't recognize, and one name I did. Lawrence M. Keller. A man I hadn't heard of in years. Not since the summer Danica went to Arizona for a writing retreat. Lawrence had been a college professor when Danica was finishing her second degree. He was older. Influential. She said he was arrogant and smelled like cigar smoke. I remember her mocking him during dinner parties, mimicking his voice, rolling her eyes when he emailed her recommendations. But now, in front of me, was documentation that painted an entirely different story. Lawrence wasn't just some professor she laughed about. He was the man in the footage. The man in the security cam videos with her and that child. And more than that, he was the owner of the house where those recordings were taken. It was registered under a shell corporation, but Erica had followed the trail. They had lived together for over 6 months. Danica had signed rental forms, paid utilities, used a different last name, Danica Keller. There were doctor visits listed under that name. A pediatrician's note for a boy named Kalen. My hands shook as I flipped through the photos. One of them was Danica holding the boy on her hip, standing next to Lawrence on a beach. She wasn't smiling like someone having an affair. She looked settled, comfortable, like someone who had started over without permission from the life she'd left behind. I stared at that picture for almost an hour. The report continued. After those 6 months, Lawrence had cut ties. Abruptly, financial records showed a large wire transfer to Danica, nearly $40,000, labeled as final disbursement. And then, just silence. No more contact, no support, no communication. According to Erica's sources, Lawrence moved out of the country, possibly remarried. So what did that make Danica? A secret partner? A discarded mistress? A single mother with nowhere left to hide? I didn't know, but it made something else painfully clear. She didn't just lie to me. She lived another life. Completely. With another man. Another name. A child. And then she came back to me like nothing had happened. Mocking me for being boring. For being predictable. For being safe. Was I the backup plan? The fallback when her fantasy fell apart? Worse, had she ever actually left me? Or was she living 2 lives at once? I couldn't stop shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at my kitchen table staring at all of it. Frozen. Until I saw the final page. A letter. Not from the investigator. From Danica. It had been inside the folder the whole time. Folded, handwritten, sealed in a plain white envelope with one word on the front. In case you ever find out. I didn't want to open it. Not really. But I did. The letter was short. Barely 2 paragraphs. It said she had been afraid I'd never see her fully. That I'd only ever loved the version of her that stayed inside the lines. That she had left because she needed to know what the world felt like without me. And when it broke her, when Lawrence vanished, she wanted to come home. But she didn't know how to explain it. So she made it a joke. A slow, cynical performance. One that would keep her close enough to be forgiven, but far enough not to be questioned. The final line of the letter? If you're reading this, I guess I was right. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. But I hope, somehow, you'll remember me before all this. Back when you loved me without wondering who else I was. I folded the paper, sat in silence, and then I laughed. Not out of humor, not out of madness, out of exhaustion, out of the brutal, surreal realization that everything I thought I knew had been fiction, and the truth was a story she'd kept locked in a file drawer while I made pancakes on Sunday mornings, thinking I was the only man she ever came home to. But I wasn't broken. Not anymore. I was ready. Because if Danica thought her games were over, she hadn't seen what came next. Some men go for revenge with fire and fury, burning bridges, slashing tires, yelling in parking lots like feral animals. That's not me. I don't want an explosion. I want silence. I want to rewrite the entire script so that by the time she looks up, she's not even a footnote in my story anymore. She joked about replacing me. So now, I would erase her, carefully, methodically, like bad code in a clean system. That night, I opened 3 tabs. One for the county court system, one for my lawyer, and one for a document I hadn't touched in years, my will. Danica's name was on everything. My emergency contact, my insurance beneficiary, even my digital backups had her fingerprint on them. It was like she'd built herself into my architecture so completely that removing her meant rewriting my entire operating system. So I did, one line at a time. I changed my banking accounts, closed every joint service, rerouted packages, and unlinked every streaming subscription she ever used under my name. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, gone. She wouldn't even be able to order paper towels on autopilot anymore. Then I got bolder. I sold the house. Quietly. Through a real estate agent I trusted. A guy who owed me a favor from a time he messed up a roof installation for one of my clients. The listing went live under a shell LLC I'd created just for this. Danica wouldn't see it coming. She still thought the house was a shared memory, something solid and unchanging. She didn't realize it was already legally mine. She'd signed it over in a bundle of finance documents years ago without looking. I staged the photos to erase her entirely. Her books, her art, her wine rack. All removed. Every sin of her washed out like a stain. When the new buyers moved in, there would be no trace she'd ever stood barefoot in that kitchen mocking my cooking or tapping her fingernail on the wine glass like I was late to my own life. Next came the social erasure. I reached out to our friends, the people who had tolerated me because of her, or her because of me. I didn't tell them we were done. I didn't trash her. I simply said, I'm moving. Starting over. Quietly. Appreciate the space. The ones who mattered responded with grace. The others? I blocked them. Not with rage. Just closed the window. Then something strange happened. Danica messaged me. It wasn't long. Just 4 words. Why are you disappearing? That was it. No greeting. No emojis. Just a hint of fear behind the digital curtain. The woman who had once laughed at the idea of me ever walking away now sounded like someone watching the lights go out, one by one. I didn't reply. She sent another message 2 hours later. You're overreacting. Overreacting? She had lived a double life. Lied to my face. Laughed while building another world under my nose. Hid a child. And now that I was finally exiting the stage, she had the audacity to say I was overreacting? I stared at her words for a long time. Then I did the final thing that turned a chapter into an epilogue. I deleted the entire thread. Not archived. Not backed up. Just gone. Danica once told me that digital memory was forever. That if something's online, it never truly disappears. I used to believe that. But now, I know better. Disappearance isn't about data. It's about choice. I chose to delete her. Not to destroy her. Not to drag her through public court or scream on social media, but to quietly sever her from every corner of my life so that, in a few months, when she tells someone about me, they'll look me up and find nothing. I'll be a blank space. A ghost. A reminder that even the boring husband has limits, and that silence can be the loudest exit of all. She wasn't used to silence. For a woman like Danica, who thrived on reactions, chaos, attention, and clever comebacks, silence was a vacuum. And in that vacuum, she began to implode. I didn't respond to her messages. I didn't acknowledge the birthday reminder she accidentally left on my old calendar. I didn't even react when she tried to guilt-trip me with a final text. So I guess you never really cared. But I did care. That was the problem. I had cared so deeply, so quietly, for so long that she mistook my silence for weakness. She believed her barbed jokes and sly affairs could exist forever without consequences, because she thought I would always be there. Reliable, predictable, endlessly forgiving. Until I stopped. What she couldn't know, was that I wasn't just deleting her from my life. I was also dismantling hers from the foundation up. It began with her job. Danica had spent years climbing through corporate PR, the kind of industry that smiled through lies, polished betrayal into branding, and sold apologies for a living. She was respected, polished, but she also had secrets. Sloppy ones. The kind you don't notice until someone like me, is no longer blinded by love. I remembered a conversation she once had on speakerphone while I cooked. She was laughing with a coworker, bragging about flipping a narrative to hide a botched campaign and throwing a junior associate under the bus. I remembered the name. I remembered the campaign. I remembered everything. So I reached out. Not as an enemy. Not as an ex. Just as a concerned citizen. Anonymously. I sent the company a package. Inside were emails I recovered from a cloud backup she didn't know I had access to. Correspondence that clearly showed she had manipulated numbers, redirected blame, and doctored statements to make herself look innocent. It wasn't illegal, but it was unethical. Enough to light a match in a room full of dry paper. She wasn't fired, but she was suspended pending internal review. She called me that night. For times. I watched her name flicker on my phone like a dying flame. No voicemail. Just raw panic. And I still didn't answer. The next blow came through a more personal route. Danica's apartment, the one she'd moved into after the divorce, wasn't actually hers. It was still under a lease she'd forged in both our names years ago to get a lower rate. She'd never updated the lease. Never removed my name. It was a legal oversight. One she'd ignored because she assumed I'd never push. But now I did. I notified the property manager. Told them I no longer resided there, hadn't for months, and refused liability for future rent or damages. I didn't even have to threaten them. They were thrilled to tear up the old lease. They gave her 30 days. That message came from them, not me. She was losing her home, her income, and her image. And I never once raised my voice. Never made a scene. I didn't post a word online. Didn't rant to friends. I just documented everything she buried, and handed it gently back to the world she pretended to own. Let it judge her. Let it take her down. And through it all, I never said her name. Not once. Danica had turned our life into a circus. She thought if she juggled fast enough, no one would see the strings. But when the curtain dropped and the audience vanished, she finally looked around and realized there was no one left watching. And I was finally free from the show. She tried one last time. It was a rainy Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after her lease fell through, a few days after the suspension notice from her company leaked into quiet, professional circles. I was sitting on my porch, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug I'd picked up at a gas station in Tennessee, watching the clouds roll low over the hills. It was peaceful, almost too quiet. And then I heard it, the sound of cautious footsteps on gravel. I didn't look up right away, but I knew it was her. "Flynn," she said softly. No edge, no laughter, no games. Just my name, spoken like an apology wrapped in uncertainty. I looked up. She was soaked from the rain. No umbrella. Makeup smudged. Not a train wreck, just a woman who finally looked real. The mask was gone. The performance was over. "I don't want anything," she said quickly. I needed to see if you're okay." That sentence should have made me angry. Should have reopened everything. But instead, it made me feel nothing. And for the first time, that nothing wasn't hollow. It was peace. I said. And it was the truth. Not a line. Not a defense. Just reality. She nodded, eyes darting toward the chair beside me. I didn't invite her to sit. "I've been thinking a lot," she whispered. "About the way I handled everything. About who I became. I was trying to punish you for being safe, for being there, for not being who I thought I wanted." I didn't speak. She didn't need forgiveness. Not from me. She looked around like she didn't recognize the world anymore. Or maybe she didn't recognize me. "Are you with someone now?" she asked after a long pause. I shook my head. "Not yet. But I'm with myself. And for now, that's more than enough." She smiled. Not her old smug smile. Something else. Something distant. Like she finally understood the damage she'd done, not just to me, but to herself. "I should go," she said. And she did. No hug. No closure. No theatrical tears. Just quiet acceptance. She walked back down the drive, into the rain, and didn't look back. And me? I stayed seated. Watched the storm move past. The next few months were quiet. Simple. I started traveling on weekends. Hiking places I'd only ever seen in calendars. I picked up photography again. Talked to strangers without thinking about what they'd report back to her. I rebuilt my circle, not out of convenience, but out of trust. Eventually, I did meet someone. Not flashy. Not a whirlwind romance. Just a kind, thoughtful connection built on conversation, not performance. And when I told her about Danica, the real version, not the edited one, she didn't flinch. She just said, "Sounds like you survived something people don't talk about enough." I smiled when she said that. Because she was right. This wasn't a story about betrayal. This was a story about reclaiming silence, about choosing peace, about learning that you don't always have to scream to leave. Sometimes you just walk out of the scene, quietly, calmly, and rebuild your life brick by brick, far from the noise, far from the lies. Danica was a chapter, but I was always the one holding the pen. And now? Now I'm finally writing my own ending. One where I'm no longer waiting to be replaced. Because I've already become someone she never even saw coming.